Many topics studied by ancient philosophers in their desire to describe an ideal society are still studied in modern sociology, including theories of social conflict, economics, social cohesion, and power in a continued attempt to describe an ideal society. Hanoum, 2003. Although we are more familiar with Western philosophers like Plato and his student, Aristotle, Eastern philosophers also thought about social issues. Until recently, we have very few texts that are non-religious in nature that theorize about social life. From 4th century through the 19th century, the Catholic Church was the seat of power from today's Turkey in the east to Western and Northern Europe, including the British Isles. Only monks who were charged with rewriting holy texts by hand and the aristocracy were literate. Moreover, the Church consolidated power. In the year 800, Pope Leo III named Charlemagne, the King of Francia, today's France, Belgium, Netherlands and Germany, Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire, giving one individual control over most of Europe. Doing so gave the Catholic Church the power to maintain its own traditions, safeguard them from the influence of people practicing other religions. If any social patterns challenged any belief of the Church, those practitioners were massacred, burned at the stake, or labeled heretics. As a result, the records that we have are extremely subjective and do not offer an unbiased view of social practice. In the 13th century, Ma Tuan-lin, a Chinese historian, was the first to record, in his seminal encyclopedia titled General Study of Literary Remains, the social dynamics underlying and generating historical development. In the 14th century, the Tunisian historian Ibn Khaldun, 1332–1406, set the foundation for both modern sociology and economics. Khaldun proposed a theory of social conflict and provided a comparison of nomadic and sedentary life, an analysis of political economy, and a study connecting a tribe's social cohesion to its capacity for power. Hanoum, 2003. Khaldun often challenged authorities. As sociologists continue to study and report on social issues and problems, they often find themselves in the center of controversy. From 1347 to 1522, the bubonic plague ravaged Europe, killing up to 35% of population. Armstrong, 2019. The plague dealt a major blow to the credibility of the Catholic Church. Out of this chaos emerged the work of Copernicus, Galileo, Leonardo, Newton, Linnaeus, and other philosophers whose work sometimes contradicted Church teachings. Events once held to be the product of the divine hand could be analyzed by human reason and observation and could be explained by scientific, testable, and retestable hypotheses. As literacy spread through conquests and colonization, more records and literature became available for sociologists and historians to put social puzzles together. In the 18th century, Enlightenment philosophers developed general principles that could be used to explain social life. Thinkers such as John Locke, François-Marie Arouet, Voltaire, Immanuel Kant, and Thomas Hobbes responded to what they saw as social ills by writing on topics that they hoped would lead to social reform. Mary Wollstonecraft, 1759–1797, wrote about women's conditions in society. Like Harriet Martineau and Jane Addams, her works were long ignored by the male academic structure, but since the 1970s, Wollstonecraft has been widely considered the first feminist thinker of consequence. Ideas about economic systems, the family, health and hygiene, national offense and defense, were among the many concerns of social life. The early 19th century saw great changes with the Industrial Revolution, increased mobility, and new kinds of employment. It was also a period of increased trade, travel, and globalization that exposed many people, for the first time, to societies and cultures other than their own. Millions of people moved into cities and many people turned away from their traditional religious beliefs. Ideas spread rapidly, groups were created, political decisions became public decisions. Among a new generation of philosophers, there were some who believed they could make sense of it all. Creating a discipline. European theorists. Auguste Comte, 1798–1857. The term sociology was first coined in 1780 by the French essayist Emmanuel Joseph Sieyès, 1748–1836, in an unpublished manuscript, Faure et al., 1999. In 1838, the term was reintroduced by Auguste Comte, 1798 to 1857. Comte originally studied to be an engineer, but later became a pupil of social philosopher Claude-Henri de Rouvroy-Comte de Saint-Simon, 1760 to 1825. They both thought that social scientists could study society using the same scientific methods utilized in natural sciences. Comte also believed in the potential of social scientists to work toward the betterment of society. He held that once scholars identified the laws that governed society, sociologists could address problems such as poor education and poverty. Abercrombie et al., 2000. Comte named the scientific study of social patterns positivism. He described his philosophy in a series of books called The Course in Positive Philosophy, 1830 to 1842, and A General View of Positivism, 1848. He believed that revealing the laws by which societies and individuals interact would usher in a new, positivist, age of history. While the field and its terminology have grown, sociologists still believe in the positive impact of their work. Harriet Martineau, 1802 to 1876. Harriet Martineau introduced sociology to English-speaking scholars through her translation of Comte's writing from French to English. She was an early analyst of social practices, including economics, social class, religion, suicide, government, and women's rights. Her career began with Illustrations of Political Economy, a work educating ordinary people about the principles of economics. Johnson, 2003. She later developed the first systematic methodological international comparisons of social institutions in two of her most famous sociological works, Society and America, 1837, and Retrospect of Western Travel, 1838. Martineau found the workings of capitalism at odds with the professed moral principles of people in the United States. She pointed out the faults with the free enterprise system in which workers were exploited and impoverished while business owners became wealthy. She further noted that the belief that all are created equal was inconsistent with the lack of women's rights. Much like Mary Wollstonecraft, Martineau was often discounted in her own time because academic sociology was a male-dominated profession. Karl Marx, 1818-1883. Karl Marx was a German philosopher and economist. In 1848, he and Friedrich Engels, 1820–1895, CO authored the Communist Manifesto. This book is one of the most influential political manuscripts in history. It also presents Marx's theory of society, which differed from what Comte proposed. Marx rejected Comte's positivism. He believed that societies grew and changed as a result of the struggles of different social classes over the means of production. At the time he was developing his theories, the Industrial Revolution and the rise of capitalism led to great disparities in wealth between the owners of the factories and workers. Capitalism, an economic system characterized by private or corporate ownership of goods and the means to produce them, had developed in many nations. Marx predicted that inequalities of capitalism would become so extreme that workers would eventually revolt. This would lead to the collapse of capitalism, which would be replaced by communism. Communism is an economic system under which there is no private or corporate ownership. Everything is owned communally and distributed as needed. Marx believed that communism was a more equitable system than capitalism. While his economic predictions did not materialize in the time frame he predicted, Marx's idea that social conflict leads to change in society is still one of the major theories used in modern sociology. Herbert Spencer, 1820–1903. In 1873, the English philosopher Herbert Spencer published The Study of Sociology, the first book with the term sociology in the title. Spencer rejected much of Comte's philosophy as well as Marx's theory of class struggle and his support of communism. Instead, he favored a form of government that allowed market forces to control capitalism. His work influenced many early sociologists including Emile Durkheim, 1858–1917. Spencer, using Charles Darwin's work as a comparison, said, "This survival of the fittest, which I have here sought to express in mechanical terms, is that which Mr. Darwin has called natural selection, or the preservation of favored races in the struggle for life." Spencer, 1864. The statement is often misinterpreted and adopted by those who believe in the superiority of one race over another. Georg Simmel, (1858 to 1918). Georg Simmel was a German art critic who wrote widely on social and political issues as well. Simmel took an anti-positivism stance and addressed topics such as social conflict, the function of money, individual identity in city life, and the European fear of outsiders. Stapley 2010. Much of his work focused on micro-level theories and analyzed the dynamics of two-person and three-person groups. His work also emphasized individual culture as the creative capacities of individuals. Ritzer and Goodman 2004. Emil Durkheim, 1858 to 1917. Emil Durkheim helped establish sociology as a formal academic discipline by establishing the first European Department of Sociology at the University of Bordeaux in 1895 and by publishing his Rules of the Sociological Method in 1895. In Division of Labor in Society, 1893, Durkheim further laid out his theory on how societies transformed from a primitive state into a capitalist, industrial society. According to Durkheim, people rise to their proper levels in society based on merit. Durkheim believed that sociologists could study objective social facts. Poggi, 2000. He also believed that through such studies it would be possible to determine if a society was healthy or pathological. Healthy societies were stable while pathological societies experienced a breakdown in social norms. In 1897, Durkheim attempted to demonstrate the effectiveness of his rules of social research when he published a work titled Suicide. Durkheim examined suicide statistics in different police districts to research differences between Catholic and Protestant communities. He attributed the differences to socio-religious forces rather than to individual or psychological causes. Max Weber, 1864 to 1920. Prominent sociologist Max Weber established a sociology department in Germany at the Ludwig Maximilians University of Munich in 1919. Weber wrote on many topics related to sociology, including political change in Russia and social forces that affect factory workers. He is known best for his 1904 book, The Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism. The theory that Weber sets forth in this book is still controversial. Some believe that Weber argued that the beliefs of many Protestants, especially Calvinists, led to the rise of capitalism. Others interpret it as simply claiming that the ideologies of capitalism and Protestantism are complementary. Weber believed that it was difficult, if not impossible, to use standard scientific methods to accurately predict the behavior of groups as some sociologists hoped to do. Weber argued that the influence of culture on human behavior had to be taken into account. This even applied to the researchers themselves, who should be aware of how their own cultural biases could influence their research. To deal with this problem, Weber and Wilhelm Dilthey introduced the concept of Verstehen, a German word that means to understand in a deep way. In seeking Verstehen, outside observers of a social world, an entire culture or a small setting, attempt to understand it from an insider's point of view. In The Nature of Social Action, Weber described sociology as striving to interpret the meaning of social action and thereby give a causal explanation of the way in which action proceeds and the effects it produces. He and other like-minded sociologists proposed a philosophy of anti-positivism whereby social researchers would strive for subjectivity as they worked to represent social processes, cultural norms, and societal values. This approach led to some research methods whose aim was not to generalize or predict, traditional in science, but to systematically gain an in-depth understanding of social worlds. The different approaches to research based on positivism or anti-positivism are often considered the foundation for the differences found today between quantitative sociology and qualitative sociology. Quantitative sociology uses statistical methods such as surveys with large numbers of participants. Researchers analyze data using statistical techniques to see if they can uncover patterns of human behavior. Qualitative sociology seeks to understand human behavior by learning about it through in-depth interviews, focus groups, and analysis of content sources, like books, magazines, journals, and popular media. Applying the discipline. American theorists and practitioners. In the early 1900s, sociology reached universities in the United States. William Sumner held the first professorship in sociology, Yale University. Franklin Giddings was the first full professor of sociology, Columbia University. and Albion Small wrote the first sociology textbook. Early American sociologists tested and applied the theories of the Europeans and became leaders in social research. Lester Ward, 1841–1913, developed social research methods and argued for the use of the scientific method and quantitative data, Chapter 2, to show the effectiveness of policies. In order for sociology to gain respectability in American academia, social researchers understood that they must adopt empirical approaches. W. E. B. Du Bois, 1868–1963. William Edward Burghardt, W. E. B. Du Bois, a Harvard-trained historian, pioneered the use of rigorous empirical methodology into sociology. His groundbreaking 1896–1897 study of the African American community in Philadelphia incorporated hundreds of interviews Du Bois conducted in order to document the familial and employment structures and assess the chief challenges of the community. These new, comprehensive research methods stood in stark contrast to the less scientific practices of the time, which Du Bois critiqued as being similar to doing research as if through the window of a moving car. His scientific approach became highly influential to entire schools of sociological study, and is considered a forerunner to contemporary practices. Additionally, Du Bois' 1899 publication provided empirical evidence to challenge pseudoscientific ideas of biological racism. Morris, 2015, Green and Wortham, 2018, which had been used as justification to oppress people of different races. Du Bois also played a prominent role in the effort to increase rights for black people. Concerned at the slow pace of progress and advice from some black leaders to be more accommodating of racism, Du Bois became a leader in what would later be known as the Niagara Movement. In 1905, he and others drafted a declaration that called for immediate political, economic, and social equality for African Americans. A few years later, he helped found the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, NAACP, and served as its director of publications. Thorstein Veblen, 1857–1929. After a brief stint as an unemployed college graduate, Thorstein Veblen began to study the economy through a social lens, writing about the leisure class, the business class, and other areas that touched on the idea of working itself. He researched the chronically unemployed, the currently unemployed, the working classes, and the impact of technology and business within society. Veblen is known as a co-founder of the branch, or school, of institutional economics. Jane Addams, 1860–1935. Jane Addams founded Hull House, a center that served needy immigrants through social and educational programs while providing extensive opportunities for sociological research. Founded in Chicago, Addams worked closely with University of Chicago's Chicago School of Sociology. This school of thought places much importance on environment in which relationships and behaviors develop. Research conducted at Hull House informed child labor, immigration, healthcare, and other areas of public policy. Charles Horton Cooley, 1864–1929. Charles Horton Cooley posited that individuals compare themselves to others in order to check themselves against social standards and remain part of the group. Calling this idea the looking-glass self, Cooley argued that we see ourselves by the reactions of others with whom we interact. If someone reacts positively to our behavior, theoretically we will continue that behavior. He wrote substantially on what he saw as the order of life in human nature and the social order, 1902, followed by social organization in 1909. He was very concerned with the increasing individualism and competitiveness of U.S. society, fearing it would disrupt families as primary groups lost their importance. George Herbert Mead, 1863–1931. George Herbert Mead was a philosopher and sociologist whose work focused on the ways in which the mind and the self were developed as a result of social processes. Cronk, N.D. He argued that how an individual comes to view himself or herself is based to a very large extent on interactions with others. Though Mead adopted Cooley's concept of looking glasses, Mead felt that an individual's reaction to a positive or negative reflection depended on who the other was. Individuals that had the greatest impact on a person's life were significant others, while generalized others were the organized and generalized attitude of a social group. Mead often shares the title of father of symbolic interactionism with Cooley and Irving Goffman. Robert E. Park, 1864-1944. Robert E. Park is best known as the founder of social ecology. Attached to the Chicago School, Park focused on how individuals lived within their environment. One of the first sociologists to focus on ethnic minorities, he wrote on the Belgian oppression of the Congolese. When he returned to the U.S., he and Ernest Burgess researched the inner city to show that no matter who lived there, social chaos was prevalent. As such, it was not the residents who caused the chaos but the environment.